Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bhakti Fundamentals. Today we return with our next question and answer session. What is reincarnation? And this session will be followed up by at least 2 other related question and answer sessions on the topics of destiny and the modes of material nature, so keep an eye out for those. Now, today's topic always carries a lot of interest for people. And for good reason. Most of us have read or seen news reports of children who recall memories from a past life, or who have extraordinary abilities in music, cooking, or mathematics, etc., from extremely young bodily ages. Most of us have also heard about what are termed near-death experiences, and also out-of-body experiences in which a person perceives the world from a position outside of their body. Now, the question of reincarnation also holds a lot of interest for people because it addresses a common fear we have before we obtain spiritual knowledge, and that is the fear surrounding death for the body. At some point or other, regardless of how much we try to avoid it, we face the question, what happens to us or our loved ones at the time of apparent death, of death for the body? Now, it turns out that for our benefit, and because He wants to give us all of the spiritual knowledge that we need to successfully transcend the suffering of this material world, Krishna gives us all the answers to life's existential questions in the Bhagavad Gita. And He begins with the questions of what is life, the jiva or the soul, and what is death for the material body. Therefore, as early as chapter 2 of the Gita, Krishna demystifies death for us and describes the process of reincarnation, or more specifically, the transmigration of the soul, which is the real us. He says in verse 13, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. And this verse is a really important one. It tells us that the body changes, but we, the spirit soul within, do not undergo those bodily changes. Positioned inside our bodies, we simply witness the changes that our bodies undergo. For all of us now, our bodies don't look like they did when we were infants, babies, toddlers, children, or early teens. And our bodies continue to change as time goes on because that is the nature of matter. Matter is always in flux. So our material bodies continue to change as time goes on. Now, interestingly, as our bodies are constantly changing from childhood to middle age to old age, even in this one lifetime, it can be construed that we are already changing bodies this whole lifetime. And what this verse tells us is that similarly, when our body dies, when our body stops functioning for some reason, disease, old age, car accident, etc., we, the jiva or the soul, the self, again change bodies. We move on to our next destination, our next body. And that's what we've been doing for countless lifetimes. Now, what's more, in the Gita we learn that I will always be me, though my external body will change from lifetime to lifetime. You will always be you, though your external body will change from lifetime to lifetime. Remember that we are the soul. We take on these material bodies to live in this material world, but we are not our bodies. We are the soul. And we never lose that core identity, our personhood, at any time. Our favorite bands, our talents, our names, our country of birth, our appearance, etc., will change between bodies. Those are all external factors, but our core identity, as the spirit soul who has an eternal relationship with Krishna, with the Supreme, that never changes. Now, in the verse right before the one we just looked at, Krishna tells Arjuna, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." And here Krishna explains to Arjuna and to us that each soul, each of us, has always existed and will always exist as personal, individual beings. So first of all, we learn we never have died and never will. That's already very comforting news, right? But secondly, we're not just eternal, but we're eternally individuals. And that's a very significant point. You and I are different jivas, different souls, and will always be different individual souls. We didn't and won't ever lose our individuality at any time. Thus, right off the bat, this spiritual knowledge that Krishna provides to us is so liberating. It should immediately give us such relief because we realize that 1, we do not and cannot ever die, only our material bodies do, and 2, I will always be me, you will always be you, etc. We never lose our core identity as spirit souls who have an eternal relationship with the Supreme or Krishna. We never lose that identity at any time. Now, Krishna provides Arjuna with this knowledge at the very beginning of the Gita because it is Arjuna's primary concern as he observes the armies before the battle of Kurukshetra begins. Arjuna is quite literally about to be surrounded by death on this battlefield. However, what he learns from Krishna is that no one on that battlefield will actually die. Rather, their souls will simply exit their bodies. They will go on existing. And in fact, we learn that because everyone on that battlefield heard the spiritual message of the Bhagavad Gita being spoken by the Supreme Lord himself and saw Krishna in person, they were actually all liberated from material existence when they did leave their bodies on that battlefield. And we can be this fortunate also, since we're now hearing the same spiritual teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. If we think about it, just how different is Arjuna's situation from our own? This whole material world is like a battlefield in which various living entities are always taking birth or receiving a material body in a certain womb, and then at some point dying. At least the material body dies. Actually, we, the soul, leave our body and head to a new body at the time of death. Or, if we follow Krishna's instructions in the Gita, we can stop the cycle of reincarnation entirely and go to Krishna, as he says in chapter 8 of the Gita. Therefore, when we have this spiritual knowledge, part of the sting of death is taken away. In fact, Krishna even likens death, or our changing bodies, to our changing of clothes. In chapter 2, verse 22, he says, "As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones." Just as we change into night clothes at the end of the day, the soul changes body at the time of death. We tend to catastrophize things that we're afraid of, but by describing death in such terms as this, Krishna removes the catastrophe for us by showing us that we do not ever actually die. We simply change clothes or bodies at the time of death, just as our bodies have been changing in this very lifetime, from a young baby's body to a middle-aged body, and finally to an old person's body. Now, why else is it important to know about changing bodies or reincarnation, aside from removing our fear of the unknown? Well, because in this very lifetime, we can determine our next destination. our next lifetime, simply by modifying our actions and consciousness. Now, on the topic of our next lifetime, upon hearing about reincarnation, some people think that they would like to, say, become a butterfly or a bird in their next lives. However, if we look at the lives of those living entities, we quickly see that the same four problems of material existence are there for the living entities in those bodies as well. And those four problems are birth, death, old age, and disease. But another point is, more important than knowing the ins and outs of how we got in the particular body we are currently in, is knowing how to use this life, how to use this body to achieve the goal of life, which is to reconnect with our source and the source of all that be, Krishna, the Supreme, or God. If we wake up one day and find ourselves locked up in a prison cell, then instead of spending our days trying to figure out how we got there, we'd be better off trying to figure out how to get out of that prison, right? In a similar way, Krishna does describe reincarnation in the Gita, but his focus in the Gita is not on the process of reincarnation itself, but rather how to exit what is known as samsara, the cycle of birth and death, how to exit the cycle of reincarnation, of cycling through different material bodies from lifetime to lifetime, by cultivating consciousness of him throughout life and at the time of death for the body. So just what is our destiny after this lifetime? What determines whether our next destination is material or spiritual? In short, the answer is that it depends on our actions and the desires and consciousness that we cultivate during this lifetime. But this brings us to the topic of our next question and answer session, on the topics of destiny and destination. So keep an eye out for that video coming up. In the meantime, thank you for listening to our session today. Let us know if you have any questions on the topic of reincarnation, and we'll see you next time on Bhakti Fundamentals.